Man. Three, two, one.
Hey, welcome to a new edition of Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. Nice to be with you on this lovely Sunday afternoon. Normally, our regular time slot is at 5 o'clock on Saturdays, so sort of often sandwiched between maybe an afternoon game and a 7 o'clock start in the NHL. But because there's so many afternoon games scheduled for this month on Saturdays, and there happens to be a bunch today as well, we're doing the show on Sunday. So we're going to be doing the show on Sunday here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. And you can also listen to us streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. We also have the hello to our friends watching online on Periscope, on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, and elsewhere. And it's another great week of hockey. We're, a week removed from the trade deadline? Feels like longer ago than that. At least it does a little bit. But lots happened since then. And actually, I don't know what happened exactly to Laura Saba, who's the producer of the show, but she's under the weather. I don't know if this is hockey related. I don't think that it's hockey related. She's sustained perhaps a lower body injury. I have no idea, but we are wishing the best to our producer, Laura Saba, and hopefully she makes a speedy recovery. I'm here by myself, so I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk more to the camera, because sometimes I'll defer to Laura, who's sitting over to my right, not the case today. But what the plan is to make this show as listener friendly as possible, while also showing some love to our friends on the World Wide Web. So yes, it is a Sunday, so I'm getting used to that. Normally my Sunday routine is to not do anything at all. Like I'm kid you not, a perfect Sunday for me. I don't leave the house. I remain in my pajamas all day long. I have broken every commandment. I'm wearing actual normal pants. As you can see, if you're watching online, these are just jeans. And I've left the house today. I went shopping. I've been cooking. It's been a crazy Sunday. But that's okay. I'm very, very glad to be with you and hanging out with you today and be able to do so until about 4 o'clock. We've got games on the schedule in the National Hockey League today. As we mentioned a little while ago, a couple of games should be starting up in the next hour or so. You got the Flyers at the Panthers. The Preds are facing the Avalanche as well. And then later on at 4 o'clock, the Blackhawks and Ducks. And then the Golden Knights face the Devils later on as well. So all those in the afternoon. Maybe the NHL doesn't want to go up against the Academy Awards tonight or something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, a lot of fun at the trade deadline the other day. And I always enjoy the trade deadline, something I look forward to. And really trade rumors. There's very little that I enjoy more as somebody who is a talk radio host and spends a lot of time talking hockey is the trades, analyzing trades, talking about and dissecting which team did better in different trades, trade rumors, the possibility of players being traded, what players' value is, all that stuff for me is gold when it comes to talk radio. I love talking about that kind of stuff, even as silly as sometimes some of the rumors will be and stuff like that. And I don't try to give a lot of credence to a lot of the nonsense that's out there, but I'm just, there is something about it that just I find so fascinating. And it really is. I can say this, like my dream job. And unfortunately, there's basically a 0% chance I'll ever be able to get this job is to be an NHL general manager. I would love to run a hockey team, and I do it. I do it in my NHL franchise and my NHL 18 franchise. I love doing that. I'm a 35-year-old man who still has an NHL franchise. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I can't get enough of that stuff. But the idea of running a hockey team and the value of players, why is this guy worth this and that guy's worth that? Why are there all these other factors that sort of weigh in on player evaluation, even outside of how good of a player they are, right? Oh, character. Is this guy got character? Is he going to fit in the room? And all that stuff. I do find it to be incredibly fascinating. And we'll have a lot on that as the day goes along. But I thought it was a lot of fun, the trade deadline this year. It was, and I felt bad for our friends at TSN who were early on in the day, right? I think they started like 8 a.m., is it? Or maybe it's 10 a.m. Anyway, they do a long show. And not a whole lot was happening for the first couple of hours, and they have a lot of fun with it. And I guess I shouldn't just say TSN. I got love for TSN because I happen to work for that company. But yeah, there's a lot of people covering the trade deadline, and there wasn't a lot of activity as the day was going on, and even really up until 3 o'clock. I guess it was around 2 o'clock that we started seeing some stuff, but there wasn't a lot of significant moves. It was after 3 o'clock that everything started rolling in, right? And we started hearing about all the deals, and I guess maybe the bigger thing was the deals that weren't made, right? The John Tavares and staying, although there wasn't much talk about him, but Erik Karlsson, excuse me. I mean, it really seemed like Erik Karlsson was going to get traded. A lot of people thought so. Max Pacioretty in Montreal, there's a lot of talk that he was going to move as well. And in the end, neither of those things ended up happening, which was a little bit anticlimactic, but we saw some big things. And the other thing is we saw some reasonably big names move who had not been in rumors, namely Paul Stastny in St. Louis. That one caught a lot of us by surprise. So the Blues were right there in the thick of a playoff hunt, and they moved out Paul Stastny. And meanwhile, Winnipeg was a team that they had to do something. They had to reward their players and their fan base for the great season that they've had, a franchise that has never won a playoff game. They got to win a playoff game this year. They got to win a playoff series this year, the Winnipeg Jets, right? So they made a real splash. They go out and they get Paul Stastny. He becomes, I guess, their third line center. I mean, well, wow, that third line was Laine, Ehlers, and Stastny. That's got to be the best third line in hockey, right? So Winnipeg, I think you're happy if you're a Jets fan. After a little bit of hand-wringing, I think that before they got Stastny, which seems like a much better move than getting Tomas Plekanec, there was talk that Plekanec, who landed with the Leafs, maybe was in the Jets' crosshairs. And then I guess Toronto offered a better deal. The deal was made. The trigger was pulled on that move last week, a little bit before the trade deadline. And a lot of people were wondering if the Jets were going to be bridesmaids once more or consolation prize winners. But Stastny's no one's a consolation prize. A long way from his 97. He had a 97-point season, which feels like a lifetime ago. But he's a good player and certainly an upgrade for them. And we were talking last week about the Jets and their need to upgrade the center ice position. So they certainly did that. And well, it's the Jets, right? It's a tough one. Do you bet on the inexperience of that Winnipeg Jets team? So many good young players and a nice mix of veterans too. Guys like Blake Wheeler having a great season, but not a lot of playoff experience on that roster. There really isn't. And they added some in Stastny for sure, but still, I do wonder how much of a concern that's going to be. But I was fascinated by what the Blues did on the other side of things, and allow me, if I may, to sort of go and dive deep into the mind of an NHL general manager, or at least do my best to try and do it. Doug Armstrong, for the second year in a row, his team is very much in the mix for a playoff spot, right? And he makes a significant trade and trades away an unrestricted free agent. And I really do think that this is, you have to bear with me here for a moment, but I'll try to tie it all together, what it is that I'm trying to say here. But one of the big things, the big dangers of a team in hockey is losing players and not getting anything in return. And it doesn't happen a lot, right? Important players, it seldom happens. We so rarely see big name players leave in free agency. If a big name player moves, it's probably because Peter Chiarelli gave up on him when he was 21 years old, like Tyler Seguin. I'm kidding, of course. And I'm sorry, Oilers fans. Hopefully that won't happen again. But Chiarelli, the example that I wanted to give you was the New Jersey Devils, okay? So the Devils were a dynasty, essentially, right? A great team, and they now appear to be they're back, right? Taylor Hall's unbelievable, and they're having this terrific season. And the Devils, when their sort of dynasty run came to an end, you think about what happened, right? Now, it wasn't Martin Brodeur retiring necessarily. It was more like Scott Stevens retired. I think Ken Danico retired, although that was a little bit earlier on. They lost Brian Rafalski in free agency. They lost Scott Niedermayer in free agency. Remember, he went to Anaheim for one last ride with his little brother. And on and on it goes, right? Of the core guys for that Devils team, they all seem to retire, leave in free agency, or leave the team in a way that meant the team did not get anything in return when those players left. And it took them a long time to sort of get that organization back on track. And now here they are, right? But I think that Doug Armstrong has sort of realized this with the St. Louis Blues. And I think he's ahead of the curve because I think a lot of general managers don't do this. Now, the reason I say that is because Doug Armstrong and the Blues, you think about what they did at the deadline last year. They were in the mix. They were in the playoff hunt. And they traded away Kevin Shattenkirk. Remember? Shattenkirk. God, wow. Surprising. But Armstrong knew he wasn't going to re-sign Shattenkirk. I believe did not necessarily see him as being a sort of a core piece type guy. That's Alex Pietrangelo, and there are other guys in that organization. And then I think he did the same thing this year with Paul Stastny. He essentially said, we're not going to re-sign Stastny. We're not winning the Stanley Cup this year. And I do believe that in both years, he essentially said this, even if he didn't come out and say it in a press conference, right? There's a difference between what a GM says and what a GM thinks. And a smart general manager, and I believe Doug Armstrong is one, has the realistic or knows when he looks in the mirror that his team is not a Stanley Cup team. There's only one every year, right? So there's a number of teams that I think could sort of apply this logic and don't. But I really do think that Doug Armstrong just said, you know what? We're not a Stanley Cup winning team with Paul Stastny. We're going to lose him for nothing in the offseason. Let's trade him. Let's do it now. And he did the same thing with Kevin Shattenkirk last year, 2 years in a row. And I think that most teams don't do that. Most teams don't do that because, A, their general manager maybe just doesn't even think it, right? Really does believe in the possibility that he's going to win the Stanley Cup despite the deficiencies that exist on his roster. And the other thing is trying to sell that to your boss, right? You have to have an owner, and I think this is a key thing here. You have to have an owner who sort of understands that line of thinking. Doug Armstrong's got Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas and other guys on the way. Big-time prospects, and if you haven't heard of these guys, I mean, if you watch the World Juniors, you probably saw them. They're both very good, and they're both on their way. for the St. Louis Blues, and maybe will be part of the team next year. Certainly will be core parts of that team 2, maybe 3 years from now. And I think he knows that, is that essentially maybe there was a championship window for the Blues when they had their core guys who were in the primes of their career that were under contract and under team control, and they made a run for it. And the Blues were a good team. They won some playoff series. They made a conference final, if I'm not mistaken, but they never got to the promised land. And I think that Doug Armstrong maybe saw this, that year after year, they were getting close, but not close enough, and decided, you know what? Let's be honest with ourselves and make the moves that need to be made to make sure that we get returns on the guys that still have value. I mean, don't get me wrong, Paul Stastny's got value, Kevin Shattenkirk's got value, but at the same time, you look at what Shattenkirk did after he was moved last year, right? I don't know if I've ever seen a player who's in their 20s move at the trade deadline and have their value drop the way it did for Shattenkirk. Remember, he was playing for the Capitals. It just wasn't good. I don't know if it wasn't a good fit, but you saw him in the playoffs, and he had a couple of moments, but he never did. He looked like, wow, this is a number one defenseman. He looked more like a complimentary player, and I think Doug Armstrong sort of realized that. Doug Armstrong's building around Vladimir Tarasenko. He's building around Alex Pietrangelo and the rest of those guys, and here's something that they need. It's to get some goaltending, which they have not done this year, and I think that might be something else that Armstrong realized. Jake Allen is not going to be, Carter Hutton, bless his soul. These guys are not going to get me to the Stanley Cup. So he made the very hard decision, and I've got a lot of admiration for that, because I think what you do tend to see from a lot of general managers in the National Hockey League, and I hope that what I'm saying does make sense on some level. This is something I've been thinking about, especially since the trade deadline, is that a lot of NHL general managers are more content to just tread water. If you want to use the swimming analogy, let's just say. And by tread water, I mean, our goal is to make the playoffs. Hey, maybe we'll win a playoff round. Great. Job well done, right? And I'm thinking of Marc Bergevin here in Montreal as sort of an example of that. When really, and not to say, I mean, this year, Marc Bergevin had Tomas McKenna to sell, and he sold at the deadline, and maybe he comes back, and maybe he doesn't. Not a big deal one way or the other. But I think a lot of GMs are content to tread water, and maybe are scared of having that conversation with their owner, in which they say, listen, boss, unfortunately, the Stanley Cup window, I believe, is closed. And don't count me in. Marc Bergevin has actually said it. He doesn't believe in Stanley Cup windows. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that the Stanley Cup window is a very real thing. Examples and recent examples of this would be the Chicago Blackhawks. Their Stanley Cup window was clearly open, and they were able to step through it into the promised land on 3 different occasions. And the Stanley Cup window for this team is now closed. I think a case could be made that Montreal, conference finalists, when Carey Price got his knee blown out by Chris Kreider, I think you can make a case that was a Stanley Cup contending team. I mean, they went to 6 even after Carey Price went down with the Rangers. And if Price was healthy, anything's possible. And now we know what Montreal is. I mean, they're bad, although they're playing good hockey right now. Excuse me. That the Stanley Cup window is closed. And look at the core guys, right? And the same thing in Chicago. Look at Jonathan Toews. Look at maybe to a lesser extent Patrick Kane. But I think we could say Jonathan Toews' best years are probably behind him based on the historical results of guys his age. They don't tend to get better offensively, right? But Carey Price next year, here's what's going to happen in Montreal. Carey Price is going to be 31 years old. Max Pacioretty is going to be, I think, 30 years old. And Shea Weber is going to be 33 years old. And that's too old. That's too old to contend for a Stanley Cup. I guess I went too long there. I kind of lost track of time. But the Canadians have 4 second-round picks. They have 1 pick, which could end up a top 5 in the first round, and that's good. That's a good starting point. And maybe a couple of years from now, some of those guys are going to be making a difference on this roster. But I think that I got to commend Doug Armstrong for being honest with himself and his boss and his fan base to an extent, by really sort of throwing in the towel, waving the white flag, whatever analogy you want to use. It seems to me that that's sort of what Doug Armstrong did at the deadline this year and last year. And that's going to yield rewards for this team down the road, as opposed to losing Paul Stastny for nothing at the end of this year and losing Kevin Shattenkirk for nothing at the end of last year. I guarantee you the returns they got in both of those trades will be players who are difference makers. I don't know about core players, but there will be at least 1 or 2 difference makers who are on this team 4 years from now as a result of the moves that Doug Armstrong made at the deadline last year and at the deadline this year. And that is where I think the smart money is these days. That's what the smart general managers are doing. You just got to be honest with yourself. Don't be delusional. Don't delude yourself. Don't delude your fans. If you're not a Stanley Cup team, and I think that we can make a case right now that maybe there's 5. I'd say maybe there's 5 Stanley Cup teams that I could see winning the Stanley Cup. And the rest, be honest with yourself. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Adam Gretz of NBC Sports. How about this run by the Florida Panthers? They're right there in the mix. And we'll talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yes, they're on my list of 5 teams that could win the Stanley Cup this year, especially after the trade deadline. Derek Brassard, are the Penguins better than they were last year when they won the Stanley Cup? I will talk to Adam Gretz about that and more. That's what's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Now the Panthers set something up. They score right off the draw to Ekblad in front. A nice wrist shot out of that right circle, and the Panthers take a 2-1 lead with 3:19 to go here in period number 1. Aaron Ekblad gives the Panthers the lead.
The Florida Panthers. Who'd have thought? Don't stick a fork in them just yet. They're on a little bit of a run right now, and they're thinking about that playoff spot. Who says only 3 teams from the crappy Atlantic Division are going to make the playoffs? Not me. Well, no, actually, I did say that all year long, and I think I probably would still bet that the standings remain closer to what they are today than the Panthers getting in. But you never know, and it's nice to have a little bit of hope, a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The Panthers, 4th in the division, they're fully 17 points behind the Leafs. So the best thing they can hope for is a wild card spot at this point. 20 games to go. They've got 5 games in hand on the Maple Leafs, who have played a whole heck of a lot of hockey games this year. They're already at 67. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. Nice to be with you, and nice to have you with us on this lovely Sunday afternoon. Our next guest joins us with a little bit more to go around the National Hockey League. I did want to ask him about these Panthers and the run that they're on. Adam Gretz from the NHL and NBC Sports and other publications. Hello, Adam.
Hey, Connor, how are you today?
I'm well, and thanks for making time for us. Definitely appreciate it, and nice to have you here with us. What do you think of this late season run by the Panthers and negative 13 goal differential? I don't know if I'd consider this team a Titan, but they've got 5 wins in a row, 8-2 in their last 10, and we have a story here, don't we?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I had actually written that I wasn't buying into their chances. Everybody kept talking about the games in hand, and it was right around the time they kind of started on this run a little bit. And I kind of wrote them off, and I'm starting to think maybe I did that a little prematurely because, you look at them now, they keep winning. They're only 1 point back of the wild card spot. They still have 3 games in hand on the teams they're chasing. And, you got to think at some point they might slow down a little bit. I don't know that anybody can keep up this sort of run that they're on for that long of a period of time, but they've definitely made it interesting. And, if they do find a way to sneak into that spot, you might have to start talking about maybe Alexander Barkov in that MVP discussion, because he's just become a force of a two-way player, just a dominant defensive player. He's been great offensively. I'm really surprised they're still hanging around as long as they have.
And he is an incredible player, Barkov. This guy was unbelievable when he was 20, and now 22 years old, and at the ripe old age of 22. You're right. Is he really has sort of, I guess, evolved into a true sort of 200-foot guy, right? He's like a coach's dream. This guy, basically, right?
Oh, absolutely. He has that defensive responsibility and defensive awareness where he plays really well without the puck, and he's I think a really underrated talent with the puck. It's not just the fact that he puts up points. He's a talented guy that can be fun to watch, and he's just become the total package for them. And, that's the type of guy you can build a team around. And you mentioned the fact he's only 22 years old. You still got to think if you assume that players hit their peak around 23, 24, 25, he's probably not even there yet. So, there's still probably room for him to grow. And they got him locked up on a pretty favorable contract. And, there's some interesting young talent there. If they could just build around it a little bit, that could be an intriguing team in the future.
What's your feel for what sort of happened to that franchise? I've heard various stories, and there's been all the talk about the computer boys and yada yada yada. But I'm curious for your take on what happened to that franchise. Dale Talon, no longer GM, moves up to president. No, now he's the GM again. We know what happened with Gerard Gallant and all the rest of it. And this was after they won the division, right? 2 years ago, they won the division. Yeah. And then last year they became this sort of train wreck, and now they appear to be sort of back on the right track. But what the heck happened in your estimation?
Yeah, I just wonder if you mentioned the division title, and they go through all these changes after that. They bring in Keith Yandel. They make some pretty significant changes to the roster, and things kind of went south a little bit. And I just wonder if they took such a big PR hit in terms of the way they were doing things and the way they kind of broke up a team that had some success. And they just thought, you know what, this isn't working. Got to undo everything. Got to go back to the way it was. And it kind of seemed to be what the offseason was about a little bit. It was about undoing everything that had been done before. And even if that meant shipping out some really good players that have become a force out in Vegas for them with Marchessault and Riley Smith. But yeah, it's been quite a 3-year roller coaster ride there. Probably one of the more fascinating teams to watch from a distance, just because of how much everything has changed so many times in such a short period of time. Just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But like I said, I like the young talent they have. They have a lot of those guys signed long-term, pretty favorable contracts, and they're not tied up against the salary cap. They have the core in place. I think that could still be an intriguing team, and that's what you need. You need to win, and you need to win to get people in a market like that into it, and they haven't done enough of that yet. But I still think there's some potential there.
And you're right about that. It is. it's amazing. I think about what happened with Marchessault and Riley Smith, and like if that happened here in Montreal, like the media would just, I mean, I can't even imagine the fan base and the media, and which is not to say I'm sure Panthers fans are upset about it, but I guess it helps when you do have guys like Barkov and Huberdeau and Ekblad and all the young talent that they have there, and Trocheck and yada yada yada, up and down that lineup. But like, wow, if that happened here and the Canadians were doing what they're doing right now, it would just, boy, would we give it to Marc Bergevin and the Canadians. All right, so let's move on here as we're chatting with Adam Gretz, and I always got to ask you about the Penguins, and I will do that in a minute. But something else I wanted to ask you about is the team that Florida's chasing. It's the Carolina Hurricanes. They've got that 1-point lead, and you mentioned Florida's got those games in hand. It's almost a miracle that the Hurricanes are there, given the caliber of goaltending that they've gotten this year, isn't it?
It's the same story with them every year. You watch them play, you look at the numbers, and you think, man, this team's going to be good. And every year at the start of the season, it's watch out for the Hurricanes this year. This is going to be the year where they kind of come on. And then every year it's the same thing where they play the same way. They seem to do the right things. They don't give up a lot of shots. They have a lot of young talent. They have a great young defense, and then they just can never find goaltending. And it's not like they haven't tried different players. They keep bringing in different guys. They tried Eddie Lack. They tried Scott Darling. They've done so many things, and they just can't get that goaltending to get them over the hump. And it's staggering. I mean, I can't get past just how consistently bad their goaltending has been for so many years, no matter who they put in there. And I don't think it's because they're a bad defensive team. I mean, you watch them play, and they seem to be a good team. They seem to have a system in place. They seem to have a direction. They seem to be well coached. They play hard. They just can't get goaltending. And it's just killing them every year, and you wonder what they could be capable of. If they don't even need great goal. I just want to see them with adequate goaltending, what they could do. And it's just, like you said, it's remarkable that they're even in this position right now, because the goaltending, again, has just been awful for them this year. And
I'm sure that like the dream bringing in Scott Darling was that Scott Darling was going to be the next like Cameron Talbot or something, right? That a guy who was a backup and to a great. I don't think Corey Crawford really gets the credit he deserves for how good he actually is. And then Darling came in, and I mean, they got this guy signed for 3 more seasons after this one at 4.15, which is, I mean, it's not a team that needs to worry about the salary cap to begin with, but it is. I mean, although I had my doubts that Darling was just going to all of a sudden morph into a true number 1, which is, a very difficult thing actually to do. But I don't think anybody could have anticipated that Darling would struggle to the extent that he has. Could they?
I don't think so, because I like the way he played in Chicago. I mean, he was a really good backup goaltender there that at times, had to play a little more than probably they wanted him to, whether because of injury or because I know that one playoff run, Corey Crawford had some struggles and Darling kind of stepped in and played really well. When he was in the lineup, he played really good, and that wasn't behind the Blackhawks team that was winning Stanley Cups every year and shutting people down. As the time has gone on there in Chicago, they've become a little bit more leaky defensively, and he was playing behind that team, and he was playing really well. And I thought that, he could step in there and at least give them something they had lacked for years, and he just has not. It just has not worked out that way. Maybe it's that first time as a number 1 goaltender, that number 1 workload, just getting to you a little bit. It's a big adjustment. Maybe in year 2 it goes better for him. Like you said, they have him signed for a few more years at a not insignificant amount of money. So he's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. So he probably gets another shot at it. But I thought he would be better than this.
And the Canes have 4 players on entry-level contracts on their blue line alone, and these are good players too. Noah Hannafin, Hayden Fleury, Jacob Slavin, and Brett Pesky, I don't know, but those guys have extensions that are going to be kicking in next year. It seems like they have the foundation for a pretty damn good team for a long time there. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens in the next couple of years. Adam, before I let you go, I did want to ask you about the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins right now 3rd in the Metro, and I guess reports of their demise earlier this year may have been at least somewhat unfounded. But wow, what about Evgeny Malkin since the turn of the year? He's been unbelievable. But what about the fact that this team gets blown out as often as they do? I mean, for a Stanley Cup champ, they've given up 7 goals in a game 4 times this year. They've given up at least 8 goals twice, and they quite infamously gave up 10 goals in a game earlier this season. Is that any kind of a cause for concern? Is it too hot of a take to suggest that Stanley Cup champions don't give up 7 goals or more 4 times in a season, at least for the most part?
I don't think that's too hot of a take at all. I think there are some legitimate concerns defensively. I think sometimes they can, I don't want to say get a little careless defensively, but I think they get so caught up in the way they play and playing fast and being on the attack that sometimes they kind of get caught in the track meet a little bit. And if you look at those games where they gave up the 7 or 8 or 10 goals, check out who the starting goalies were in those games. And I don't think Matt Murray started any of them. You had Anthony Niemi early in the year, which just did not work out for them. And then the other night in Boston, you had Casey DeSmith and Tristan Jarry. And I think that's the concern, where if something happens to Matt Murray, which has happened on more than one occasion in his career already, he has been banged up at times, they don't have Marc-Andre Fleury coming off the bench to calm things down in there a little bit. They have 2 young guys that don't have much NHL experience, and they've struggled a bit lately. And you put that, you combine that with a team that really isn't great defensively. I don't think they were great defensively last season either. The thing that masked it last season was they had 2 goalies that were playing outstanding. That, Marc-Andre Fleury got them through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. Then Matt Murray comes in for the last 2 rounds and just picks right up where Fleury was playing. I think that kind of masked a lot of the flaws a little bit. This year, they haven't really had that level of goaltending. Murray hasn't been quite as good as he was last season. And when he's been out of the lineup, they've had nobody that can play. So I think that's where a lot of the concern comes in. And, I think it's a legit concern. They're going to score goals with anybody in the league. They have that type of firepower. You just question if they can stop anybody, and if anything happens to Matt Murray, who's going to be able to step in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time, and I guess the question is certainly valid because of the fact that Murray has been hurt as frequently as he has throughout the course of his very young career. But at the same time, I mean, what team is that not true of their number 1 goaltender? I mean, that was right. That was a hell of a luxury that they had last year, having Marc-Andre Fleury as their insurance policy, right? All right, man. Well, listen, it's a pleasure. Always fun to talk hockey with you. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Hey, my pleasure. Anytime.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Usually reserved. That's something that you say at like Dairy Queen, right? But in this case, I think it's apt. That was a dad joke for those of you keeping score at home. And no, I don't have any children. Arthur Staple of The Athletic. He's got a new gig. He's with The Athletic covering the New York Islanders. What was the deadline strategy for the New York Islanders exactly? Did they do anything that you think, if you're John Tavares, you're like, yes, Garth Snow, I'm staying, baby. I'm going to be very curious to see how this thing plays out in the next couple of months. So we'll talk Islanders with Arthur Staple next. This is Hockey Primetime. We are on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. As always, we're also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
turn your mic on after the Barzal goal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Puck loose in the near corner. Ladd first to it. For Everly behind the Winnipeg net. In front for Barzal. Shoots and scores! Matt Barzal has his first hat trick in the National Hockey League. And it gives the Islanders the 4-1 lead. The Hats are hitting the ice here at Barclays Center.
Ah, yes, Matthew Barzal. What a season he's having. And, well, if only everybody else on the Islanders, maybe if that blue line can get a little bit of that Barzal magic, they'd be in better shape right now. Kind of a strange and sort of tumultuous season for the New York Islanders. I was reading Larry Brooks sort of skewer them in the New York Post this morning, and times aren't great, I don't think, for the New York Islanders. With more on that, my favorite person to talk Islanders with is Arthur Staple with The Athletic New York on the Islanders beat. Hello, Arthur. How goes it?
I'm good, Connor. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. And that was a 3-2 overtime loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday. The Islanders 29-29-8 on the season so far, and mathematically they are still in it. But well, I mean, we know that's a tough division, and they are at the bottom of the standings in that division. Although right there with the New York Rangers in terms of points, but. Is it safe to say that this is sort of a lost season and potentially, I guess, say at least in terms of the season that Barzal is having, sort of a bit of a waste?
Yeah, it's not just him. I mean, obviously he's been a real revelation this year and probably going to win the Calder Trophy. But they've got John Tavares and Anders Lee. He's got 30 goals, and Josh Bailey's an all-star. And there were a lot of good things happening with this team the first couple months of the season, and pretty much since the beginning of December, it's just been less than mediocre. It's been disappointing, and to see them these last couple of weeks when they still had a chance to be in this playoff race, and I guess, like you said, mathematically they're still in it, but they keep falling behind teams, even though they're not a massive amount of points away, but. They were right there with Columbus and Carolina, and 6 straight losses, 0-4-2, and just a lot of missed opportunities, even at this late stage when they could have really salvaged something. And yeah, it just sort of doubled down on the like you said, a bit of a waste of a season from a really good season from some guys, and an eye-opening season from Matthew Barzal.
Yeah, I mean, wow, this guy's unbelievable. And I mean, nobody saw it coming that this guy was going to be like a point-a-game player. I wouldn't imagine as a rookie, and I know he was certainly highly touted and a guy who we knew was going to be a good player. But how surprising is it that he's been this good this fast?
I think it's pretty much a surprise when you watch him play the way that he plays. Yeah, I think everybody knew he was a talented guy, and led Seattle to the Memorial Cup Finals last year. And there's plenty of there's always a few dozen guys who come out of junior with some hardware and with some gaudy stats. But when you watch him play and really just the way that he controls the play with his edge work, his skating ability, and his vision, he's turned a lot of heads. And it's hard to even say when the last time the Islanders had a rookie like this. Obviously, John Tavares is the captain and he's the face of the franchise, but they're very different style players. And Tavares is more of a forceful guy, and just the creativity that Barzal brings, and the way that he's been able to pretty much about the second or third week of the season to get opposing players noticing him and really unable to do a lot about him when he's on his game. Three different 5-point games. It's just a sign that he can take over at any given moment, and he's been the guy that's driven this pretty high-powered offense with the Islanders, and that's saying a lot.
Chatting with Arthur Staple of The Athletic New York on the New York Islanders, and 237 goals against is a massive, massive number. I don't have the I don't have these standings in front of me at this moment, but I would be surprised if they weren't the worst defensive team in the National Hockey League. And if you look at that depth chart, I mean, there's some, Boychuk and Letty, good players for sure. Calvin DeHaan, who's I know have been hurt, but after that, it seems like there's a pretty heavy drop off. How much of this, and I know the goaltending hasn't exactly set the world alight this year either. How much of their difficulties can be pinned on the blue line that Garth Snow put together?
I mean, there's some, but I think, when you give up that many goals, when you're giving up 3.5 a game in the modern era, the post 04-05 lockout era, that falls on everybody. This is, Calvin DeHaan went down in the middle of December, lost for the year. That's a big blow, and Boychuk missed a bunch of time. So they were using some more unproven guys on the blue line, but this is forwards turning pucks over in the neutral zone and not tracking back well. This is defensemen leaving bad gaps. This is goalies giving up too many goals. This is a coaching staff that hasn't been able to adjust to a situation that was a problem. Even when they were 15-7-2 at the end of November, they were still giving up a lot of goals and winning 4-3 and 5-3. So it's hard to really point the finger at one position or one player or one person behind the bench. It's been in a season where they've been very inconsistent. That's probably the one group effort that they've had, which is not a plus, that's for sure.
Watching them a couple of weeks ago, the Canadians put up 52 shots on them, and I mean the Canadians are quite bad and were actually quite awful at that point. They've actually played quite a lot better since around that time. But yeah, I remember that game. I was just thinking like, wow, I mean, look at the Canadians. They're coming out in waves here. Still though, the Canadians managed to lose that game. It is worth noting. The Islanders got a 5-4 overtime win that night. John Tavares with a couple of goals. All right. Next question. The trade deadline strategy for Garth Snow. If I ask you this question, what was Garth Snow's deadline strategy? What would you tell me?
I mean, it certainly seems pretty obvious to me that he didn't think this team was a piece or two away from competing. Even whether we want to say competing for a Stanley Cup, that's usually what the general managers say. But I even think competing for a playoff spot, and again, that's, I've had this question a lot, and it's not to absolve him of blame for the team that he put together. And there's obviously lots of legitimate questions about what sort of organization they have going forward, aside from guys like Barzal. But, floundering around the cut line when really their best assets were their own first and second round picks and the first and second round picks they got from the Flames and the Travis Hamonic deal. Was it worth it to give up one of those 4 picks right now for some sort of quick fix that, were they in a position to just get one guy that would turn things around? And he clearly thought no on that front. And as disappointing as it was for the fans, and I'm sure for the guys in the locker room, but had they done enough to warrant it? And really their play the last 2 weeks, or the results the last 2 weeks have shown that he was right. And, you don't want to compound the mistakes that you made in the off season and the beginning of the year by making more of them at the deadline, and then you've got less to work with when June comes around and when the chance to make some serious upgrades with a lot of teams looking to make moves around the draft comes along. So not an encouraging strategy as far as the fans are concerned, and I've certainly heard from lots and lots and lots of them about it. But I think for the long-term view of this franchise, it was probably the right move.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something we were talking about in the first hour of the show here, is the sort of the general managers realizing, hey, we're not winning the Stanley Cup here. Let's not do anything crazy or do anything stupid that's going to compromise the future. And with 2 picks in the first, 2 picks in the second, this is a big draft coming up for the Islanders. You're right. And I've heard it said, and I guess we'll make this our last question. I didn't want to spend this entire time talking about will he or won't he with John Tavares, but I have heard it said that that if the Islanders don't make the playoffs, Tavares is going to leave, which seems like a crazy way of evaluating it from Tavares' standpoint. But what do you think? Does what's going on with the team right now, the sort of underwhelming season, how much of a bearing does that have on whether or not 91 is back with the Islanders next year?
Well, it sure doesn't help. Let's put it that way. I don't know if it's the factor, but if he's looking for a place where he wants to win, and he's evaluating his own team that he's on for the last 9 years, and he's looking at 2 straight playoff misses to cap this run. That's not it's not going to make anybody think better about staying. But I think, judging by the way that he's approached it and talking to people around him, his reasons for not signing last summer were not necessarily all about, you got to make the playoffs or I'm out of here. I think it was more the future viability of the franchise, the future credibility of the franchise. Part of that was finding a place to play, and they did that, even though half of this contract that he might sign with them wouldn't be played at this new arena in Belmont Park Racetrack. But it still speaks to the organization and how it's viewed around the league, and how you can talk about it without getting mocked or ridiculed. It's happened a lot with the Islanders and their fans and over the years. But now, if he's turning his focus to, can I win with this team long term? No, missing the playoffs definitely does not help, and missing the playoffs 2 years in a row is a big problem. But we talked about Barzal. I don't know if John Tavares is going to find another team that can afford to fit him into their salary cap with a number 2 center as dynamic and as young as Matthew Barzal. And like I said, Gretz didn't make any trades at the deadline to kind of appease Tavares, but maybe he can do so at the draft to put the team, whether it's a new goaltender, whether it's another top 4 defenseman. So there's moves to be made before John Tavares makes his decision, and that may tip the scales in their favor, or we'll see who else makes their pitch on Tavares, whether there's some appeal there. But yeah, it's I don't think it's the factor of missing the playoffs, but certainly not a good one if you're evaluating them as Tavares is.
I think you make a great point about Barzal, though, on an entry-level contract and that 1-2 punch. Where else could he go that he would have a guy like that playing in the number 2 spot behind him? It's going to be fascinating to watch, and we'll be following along with a great deal of interest from the Athletic, New York City. Arthur Staple, thanks for your time.
All right, Connor. Thanks a lot. Anytime.
That is Arthur Staple. I'm Conor McKenna. And yeah, this is Hockey Primetime. What a story that is going to be. And I know that Islanders fans don't want to hear this, and why would you? I mean, it is. Oh, this Lightning fans went through it, right? A couple of years ago with Steven Stamkos. So what's going to happen? And part of me wants to see John Tavares hit the market. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I can say this because I'm not really a fan of the Islanders. I'm more of a neutral observer at this point. I just think it would be so fun to see a player that good hit the market at that age. It never happens. Never happens, right? But the Islanders better pony up the cash. I mean, the same thing with Erik Karlsson in Ottawa. You've been paying this guy way under market value for basically the entire time he's been with your team, and you are at some point going to have to pay up. The question is, are the Islanders going to be willing to do that? And is Tavares going to be willing to sign that check, regardless of how much money is on the offer? It's a fascinating storyline, and if you're not an Islanders fan, it's a lot of fun to sort of keep an eye on. Coming up next, what are smart NHL general managers doing right now that they weren't doing before? We'll talk a little bit about the prices paid for certain players and how general managers can capitalize on quote-unquote character issues. That's coming up next here. It's Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back. All right, so we're just wrapping up the first hour of the show. This is Hockey Primetime. My name's Conor McKenna. Nice to be hanging out with you on this Sunday afternoon. I hope you're having a good one. We've got NHL games getting going momentarily and plenty throughout the course of today. In a few minutes, it'll be the Flyers and the Panthers getting it going. The Panthers looking to get into the playoffs. Outside of them looking in, but a couple games in hand. And the Avalanche host the Preds. The Preds are looking pretty darn good, aren't they? So, just wanted to say, and I wanted to give a shout out to Joe Thornton out in San Jose. I love this gesture, and if you haven't heard about it, the Sharks went out and got Evander Kane, and I can't believe the price that they paid for Kane, who had 20 goals at the time of the trade. I like Evander Kane, 26 years old, 20 goals at the deadline, and Joe Thornton went and picked him up at the airport. A lot of teams spend a lot of time worrying about, this guy doesn't fit with our culture. This guy's got character issues. That's how you pay pennies on the dollar for star players. You find general managers who are too caught up in those types of things, and you pay pennies on the dollar for a great, great player. Coming up next, it's hour number 2 of the show. Andy Strickland on the Blues. Coming up next.
Perfect.
His shot, fought off by Hunt. Out in front, they score! Alexander Radulov! Now here comes Stephen Johns. Over to Sagan. Tough pass. Was on his backhand. He jammed him a bit with it. 2 minutes to go in overtime. Sagan picks the puck free. Out to Ben. Scores!
Oh, yeah, Jamie Benn. And did you see the celebration by Jamie Benn? The Bo Jackson? I don't know if this was, is Jamie Benn even, is he young enough that he doesn't even know who Bo Jackson is? You remember Bo Jackson would snap a baseball bat on his knee or on his, didn't he do it on his head once, if I'm not mistaken? Like it was a toothpick. Well, we saw Jamie Benn do that with his hockey stick after scoring the overtime winner yesterday. One of my favorite goal celebrations in recent memory. If you're a Blues fan, you probably didn't enjoy that too much. So the Stars rally, and they end up beating the St. Louis Blues in overtime as the Blues slide continues. It started long before the trade deadline when Doug Armstrong surprised a lot of us by going out and being a seller in a pretty big way. But things are not great for this Blues team right now, although the future is extremely bright, and it really has been for quite a while. A good organization. Andy Strickland with Fox Sports Midwest covers the St. Louis Blues, and it is a pleasure to welcome him to the show to talk a little bit about what's going on with the franchise right now. Hello, Andy.
Connor, good to be with you. And if you go back and look at the video of the game-winning goal scored by Jamie Benn, Tarasenko did it almost simultaneously. He broke his stick over his leg.
No.
Although he did it over the knee. So two broken sticks at once after the game-winning goal scored by Dallas.
Yeah, wow. I actually did not know that. That's hilarious. And, for as you say, for very different reasons. That's the thing about these sticks, though, right? They break so easily. I think I saw a guy break one while doing a poke check the other day. It's just it's crazy. How easily these things break. So let's start a little bit here on what Doug Armstrong is doing here. I started off the show talking about this, and I believe Doug Armstrong to be one of the best general managers in the National Hockey League, and I really, really like what he did this year at the deadline. I like what he did last year. I think that a lot of GMs would be smart to sort of say, you know what? We're not winning the Stanley Cup this year. Let's get something for Kevin Shattenkirk. You know what? We're not winning the Stanley Cup this year. Let's get something for Paul Stastny instead of losing this guy for nothing. It's not something you see very often in the National Hockey League. What do you make of Doug Armstrong's strategy for the last two deadlines?
I think every general manager, Connor, is in their own unique situation. You look at Ray Shero in New Jersey. He's rewarding his players, even though he knows he probably won't come out of the Eastern Conference and win the Stanley Cup. Probably isn't a significant threat, although they're a confident team. But you look at where they were last year versus where they are now. So why not move a couple of draft picks and bring in, a guy with speed and Michael Grabner and certainly a possession guy who can, be a net front presence and play with guys who can skate. Everyone talks about Pat Maroon, how he can't skate, but he's played with McDavid and he's played with Getzlaf and Perry, so he can play with elite players. He's shown that in the past. So a different situation than Doug Armstrong is in, where the expectations were high coming into the season. They went to the third round a couple of years ago, of course, won a round last year in the playoffs. But he doesn't look at a rental player as putting this team over the top. So why move assets or why move draft picks if you really don't think you're going to win? So you got a guy who is going to be a pending UFA. They signed him to a 4-year contract extension, in the summer in free agency a few years back in Paul Stastny. And, somebody's offering you a first-round pick for him. And again, a different situation for Winnipeg. They believe they can win it all, and they're looking for their first playoff victory ever, let alone a playoff series. They haven't won a playoff game. So, again, the mentality is different for every team. But if you're going to get a first-round pick for a pending UFA, when you're barely hanging on with them on the roster, I thought it was a very smart move.
Looking at what happened last weekend to the Blues, Friday night, 4-0 loss to the Winnipeg Jets. Sunday, 4-0 loss to the Nashville Predators, maybe the two best teams in the Western Conference, and maybe a bit of a reality check. I wonder, how much of an impact do you think those two results had on what Doug Armstrong decided to do on Monday?
Everything, but not just those two games, but the games leading up to those two games. Like I mentioned, even with Paul Stastny in the lineup, the team was in the midst of a bad losing streak. They had lost 7 in a row, but they had lost 6 of those 7 prior to the trade taking place. So, to plan a week before the deadline or 10 days before the deadline was not to move Paul Stastny. I mean, they thought they were in a good situation, a good spot in the Central Division, and that they wouldn't hit this tailspin. And so the thought of moving a guy really didn't come into play until the players essentially, Connor, made the decision for Doug Armstrong. You know, I mean, obviously, if you're not winning games, and you just see this slide, this uncontrollable slide taking place with this hockey club, because it's not just losing, but it's how they were losing. You know, getting blown out in games. You look at yesterday; they gave up a lead late in the game. That had happened, you know, several times now this season, where this team has had a lead and been in position to finish it off, and they just couldn't do it. You know, and again, yesterday was a situation like that. So, again, you got a guy who's 32 years of age, Winnipeg. They now have depth up the middle, and again, they're looking to add. The Blues weren't looking to add, and they're getting a first-round pick in return. And Doug Armstrong looked to move that first-round pick. I mean, he could have flipped it at the trade deadline and added a piece maybe. But again, the price was so high for some of these guys who had term left in their contract. And you mentioned the future of the Blues. I mean, you look at some of the prospects they have. We're talking about legitimate blue pick, you know, blue chip 5-star prospects, to use a basketball or football term. That's what these guys are. So again, you're not going to rush to move them. I'm not saying that Doug Armstrong won't do so in the summer, but there's a couple of guys that he has no interest in moving. And when you have players like that in your organization, you know the phone's going to ring because everybody else is going to want them. But probably a smart move, obviously, to stand pat right now.
And at the same time, you can talk about some of the older guys on this roster, and Stastny was one of them. But they also have core guys who are still relatively young, right? Jaden Schwartz is 25. Braden Shen and Vladimir Tarasenko are both 26 years old. Alex Pietrangelo is 28. Colton Parayko is 24. Those guys are good NHL to great, if not superstar NHL players, depending on who we're talking about right now. And then there is the guys that you're referring to waiting in the wings, Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, being two of the guys that right there at the top of the list. And they've always been a team, at least as long as I can remember, that really does a good job of drafting and identifying these guys and finding them, despite the fact that they very seldom have high draft picks. But I guess the question, Andy, that I'll ask you is about goaltending, and that has been an Achilles heel for this team for also a pretty darn long time. So what about that, and how do they solve that problem? Is that somebody who's potentially in the organization now?
Well, this is the question that has been asked to me for about 20 years now. I mean, Connor, it just seems like every time you feel like you have the guy, and in this case, in Jake Allen, I mean, they're paying him number one goaltender money, maybe not Carey Price money or at the high end, but certainly, you know, the type of money that you would give to a guy who you expect to be the number one. And for whatever reason, Jake Allen has shown signs of being a great goaltender, and he shows signs of having some issues with consistency. And you know, for whatever reason, that's what everybody is trying to find out, I think, inside the organization, is why does this continue to happen? And I don't think they're ready to turn the page on Jake Allen. In fact, I know for a fact they didn't try to move him at the deadline. They didn't try to move either of their goaltenders. You know, Carter Hutton, obviously, he's been a huge plus and a huge bonus to this hockey team. It seems like every time he plays, they earn a point. But he didn't play for a good chunk of that losing streak, where they essentially gave Jake Allen the opportunity, Connor, to shut the door on Carter Hutton and regain his place as the number one goaltender for this organization. I mean, they gave him an opportunity to do so. And I'm not going to sit here and say he won't be the number one moving forward, but, you know, these points are so valuable right now. You can't mess around with that. You got to play the guy that gives you the best chance to win. And obviously Carter Hutton appears to be that guy right now. But, you know, they've got a guy, Billy Husso, who's in the organization that they're extremely high on. Again, they fully believe that he has number one goaltending potential. Starting to play his best hockey of the year down in San Antonio right now. He played the top league in Finland before coming over to North America, where he was named the top goaltender in that league and led that league in goals against average and save percentage, much like Jake Allen did. I mean, you look at his path to the National Hockey League. You know, he was the top goaltender in the CHL, Connor, and very highly thought of. You know, starting goaltender for Team Canada in the World Juniors, started the gold medal game, didn't finish the gold medal game, but started it. And then in the American Hockey League, he leads that league in all the important statistical categories: win, shutout, save percentage, the whole 9 yards. So they believe that he was on path to do what he did last year, which was be one of the top goaltenders in the NHL down the stretch. Was great in the first round matchup against Minnesota. Single-handedly won some of those games. and was exactly what they needed. And to begin this season, he was on fire. Just unbelievable. And then obviously the wheels fell off, and goaltending has been a huge part of it.
Yeah, I covered Jake Allen actually pretty closely and extensively when I was doing junior hockey here in Montreal. He played for the Montreal Juniors organization, and he was a real good goalie, but he was also his own worst enemy. In big games, he seemed to always, and we saw this happen here in Montreal for the team which at the time was called the Montreal Juniors, just kind of melt down in a Game 7 in the playoffs, and we saw it in the gold medal game for Team Canada as well. And I always wondered, is that a sort of a sports psychologist type situation? Is that something that a guy can get past? What you're describing is something else entirely. When you can't find your consistency game to game in the regular season, you don't even need to worry about big games because you're not getting there necessarily. But that's got to be frustrating. And this was a guy, right? I think Jake Allen was a first-round draft pick, if I'm not mistaken, but late in the first round. Is that right, or was he a second?
Really early in the second.
Early in the second.
He was taken 34th overall, 32nd overall, somewhere in that range.
That's why I love you, Andy, is that I know that I can ask you that question. You'll be able to give me the exact number. So I guess that's it. So I have a proposal for you here from Montreal. Okay. We're going to send Carey Price to St. Louis, and all we ask in return is Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou. What do you say?
Ooh. That's all you want. And how much is Carey Price owed next year?
He will be making $10.5 million for each of the next 8 seasons for a total of $84 million over the 8-year deal.
Yeah. I'll probably pass on that. Okay. You know why, Connor? Because, hey, listen, predicting goaltending from one year to the next has proven to be an inexact science. You just can't do it. You have no idea how one guy is going to perform from one year to the next. And, who would have thought Carter Hutton, when he signed a 2-year deal here, would all of a sudden be the guy that you're counting on to earn you points late in the season. And this has been the year of the backup goaltender. It hasn't just been here in St. Louis. It's been everywhere. And to get to this level, this is why I have so much respect for guys that can play at this level. I don't care what position we're talking, but especially goaltending. And they're so good now, Connor. Every single one of these guys have the ability to win a game, to have a great week, 2 weeks. Obviously, what separates the number ones from the backups is obviously consistency, but all of these guys have the ability to play great hockey, and we shouldn't be surprised at all that any of these guys find ways to get W's and play solid hockey when you get to this level. I coach U15 AAA hockey here in town, and it's hard enough to score at that level. These goaltenders are big at 15 years of age. They're 6 feet plus, and it's just amazing how the position has changed and how difficult it's become to score, even though scoring is up this year, but there's other reasons for that. But the goaltending position is truly a head scratcher. Once you think you know how good a guy is, you truly don't.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you know what? We've seen it here in Montreal with Antti Niemi, who I actually have his numbers up here in front of me. Before he arrived in Montreal, he had a 7.5 goals against average, 3 losses in 3 games, 16 goals allowed, and a .797 save percentage for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Then he went to Florida for 2 games. He had an .872 save percentage, of 5.08, and then he came to Montreal and he started working with Stefan Waite, the goaltending guru, and who's arguably the best goaltending coach in hockey. The guy's got a .931 save percentage in 12 games played, 10 starts for the Canadians. It's remarkable sort of how these things can change, not just from year to year, but from month to month, or even game to game, and in this case, coach to coach. And well, speaking of coaches, I guess we'll wrap it up by asking about Mike Yeo, who had a pretty epic post-game rant after that 8-3 loss to Minnesota the other day. He's all right? He hasn't been coaching this team for that long, and is he on solid footing as far as job security?
Oh yeah, no, I think so. Listen, they made a change by moving out Paul Stastny. And real quick, don't forget Antti Niemi also won a Stanley Cup, right? So he was once at the top of the mountain,
sure,
among goaltenders, just in terms of winning a Stanley Cup. And I do think the organization still has confidence in Jake Allen in terms of what he can be, just based off of what he's shown at times. It's not a fluke. When he plays well, it's not a fluke. He's been able to maintain that level of play for a decent amount of stretches. But again, there's the peaks and the valleys. There's a lot of separation in his game between the two. But Mike Yeo, absolutely. I'm not putting this on the coach. I think the narrative here in St. Louis has been to blame the coach far too long. It's always been to point the finger at the coach, and I think that's the easy way out. And I think now more than ever, I think more of the blame and more of the finger pointing is being, pointed towards the players, which we haven't seen a ton of over the course of at least my time being around this organization and covering it on a daily basis. So I'm not about to start that game and start blaming the coach. It's way too soon for that.
Andy, a pleasure as always. Thanks for making time for us on your Sunday.
Okay, Mike. Excuse me. Now I'm calling you Mike Yo. Okay, Connor, no problem at all.
Cheers. Yeah, and that's all right. You're gonna confuse me with somebody. I'll take Mike Yo. That's fine. Probably knows a little bit more about hockey than I do. All right. This is Hockey Primetime. My name's Conor McKenna. I hope you're having a good Sunday, and I do. I appreciate you spending it, at least part of it, hanging out here with us. We've got a lot to do between now and the end of the show. And, I'm going to make sure to try to get as much of it done as I possibly can. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the Vegas Golden Knights with Jesse Granger. Is the bubble bursting on the Vegas Golden Knights? I've been waiting for this team to turn into a pumpkin all year long. And, they've been as good as any team in the NHL for the most part. But lately, I don't know if we're seeing some signs of trouble. We'll find out what Jesse Granger thinks. He's covering that very same team. We'll talk Vegas Golden Knights on the other side, the greatest expansion team in the history of sports. That's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM, NHL Network Radio, also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Karlsson, left wing, he shoots and scores! William Karlsson, and the Knights are within one. 35th goal of the season for William Karlsson, third most in the NHL.
Yeah, that's William Karlsson, and one of many amazing stories surrounding the Vegas Golden Knights. I think that's the best one, though. He's got 35 goals on the season. 35 goals. Guy had like 5 goals last year. Nobody had ever heard of him before. Now he's one of the best scorers in the entire NHL, part of this incredible story that's taking place out there in the desert with the Vegas Golden Knights. It is amazing, and we'll see if it holds up. Did lose to the Ottawa Senators the other day. With more on the story with the Vegas Golden Knights, we welcome into the show who covers the team for the Las Vegas Sun. Name is Jesse Granger. Jesse, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for making time for us here. I do appreciate it. This really is a remarkable team and a remarkable story. So let me just start. I mean, how much fun are you having covering this incredible story?
I mean, it's been a blast. It's just going into this whole thing, the whole unveiling of the name, and when Vegas got the team. I've been in Vegas for a long time. I wasn't born here, but I've been here a long time, and this city was just waiting for a professional sports team, and just the whole process of getting one was awesome. And I mean, we all assumed that this team would be 20 points out of the playoffs at this point, and it would still have been fun just covering the first major professional team in Vegas history. But they've made it even more exciting than we ever could have imagined.
They really have, and you can count me among those who listen. I mean, my opinion is worth the paper it's printed on, but yeah, I'm one of the many people who thought that the Vegas Golden Knights were going to be a team that was very much in the mix for Rasmus Dahlin, and not a team that's first in the Pacific Division. And just continuing to do it. And even, when this was happening, the first couple of months of the season, I was like, no way, the bubble's going to burst. There's no way they can keep this up. Obviously, they've been able to keep it up. Although lately, and it might be as rough of a patch as this team has been through this year, which is saying something because it hasn't been that rough of a patch for them. But is there any cause for concern with a couple of recent losses?
I don't think so. They're really banged up right now, and I know a lot of teams are, so that's not a great excuse. But they're missing James Neal, who's such a big part of the offense, and then Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is the lockdown defensive guy on the fourth line. That really this team's success has been because Gerard Gallant runs four lines constantly. Play their fourth line more than any team in the league, and Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is a huge part of that. He's been out. James Neal's been out. Nate Schmidt is now out. He didn't go on the trip to New Jersey and this long road trip they have. So they're missing some really key pieces, and I think that's hurting them. And I also just think it's a long season, and this team plays a really hard forechecking game, and I think they're going to go through just little runs where they maybe they can't keep that effort and energy up 100%. But I guess this is a good time to have it. You'd hope that they get things back going before playoffs, because you see how that happens when teams kind of start off hot and limp into the playoffs.
Huh. Yeah, and you know what? It's also true that depending on what the injury is, it can be if there is a silver lining to a guy being banged up, it's that he can sort of get a little bit of rest and come back a little bit more fresh for what becomes the grind of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Golden Knights, by the way, are back at it 5 o'clock Eastern time, so about 90 minutes from now, taking on the New Jersey Devils as they make their only visit to Newark this season. Other than that, and don't forget, I mean, it is Oscar night. You got to get these games out of the way early on, and there is a whole bunch of them on the schedule in the National Hockey League today. I was reading your piece recently in the Las Vegas Sun, well, to be specific, at lasvegassun.com, about Alex Tuch and Shea Theodore getting their housing letters, which you got some great quotes from the kids. But for the uninitiated, and if you wouldn't mind, I was not aware of what a housing letter was and what exactly that meant until I read your piece. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means, getting a housing letter for a young NHL player?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things I've done this season, because it was honestly when they started. I was talking to Alex Tuch, just talking with him in the locker room, and he mentioned the housing letter, and I had no idea what it was. So these guys that are kind of back and forth from the AHL and the NHL, which Alex Tuch was with the Minnesota Wild and Shea Theodore was with the Anaheim Ducks last season. They don't get a house, obviously, in their NHL city, because they're only here for a few days, a few weeks at a time. So when Alex Tuch and Theodore both were called up to the Golden Knights after just a short stint in Chicago, they were staying at Red Rock Casino, which is right across the street from their practice facility. Super nice casino, and there are perks to that. There are restaurants downstairs. The team is paying for you to stay there, so you're not paying any housing fees or anything. Huh. But eventually you want to live in a house, so that the NHL team will finally give you a housing letter, which is a letter. Basically, it doesn't guarantee, they can still send you down to the AHL, but it's essentially guaranteeing you're now part of the NHL squad. You're going to be up here the rest of the season. Go ahead and get a house. And these two guys liked rooming with each other so much that they ended up renting a house together, and now they can cook their own meals, do all that stuff.
Nice. No, that's great. And Alex Tuck and Shea Theodore, just two of sort of the excellent young players that this team is putting out there night after night. And I guess, and the other thing is that they were buyers at the trade deadline, right? I mean, that is the byproduct of the kind of success that they've had. Although there was some question, right? Because I guess the plan must have completely changed. Like even George McPhee, I'm sure there's no way that he's with a straight face could tell you, oh yes, I'm not surprised by the amount of success that we're having this year. You could even see it in their strategy. At least that was my take on it for the expansion draft, was getting a whole bunch of good older players who were on expiring contracts that could presumably be flipped at the trade deadline for draft picks. But well, they weren't in seller mode, so they weren't able to do that. And in fact, they were buyers. They go out and got Thomas Tatar from the Detroit Red Wings. How drastically do you think the strategy changed as the season progressed and they just kept piling up wins?
A lot. I think McPhee did get some guys in the expansion draft that he hoped would become kind of franchise building blocks. Guys like William Karlsson, guys like Jonathan Marchessault, Tuck, Theodore, but guys like David Perron, James Neal, Lucas Spiza, that were all UFAs, that will all be UFAs this summer. I figured that they'd all be traded at the deadline, and even the players, and they don't know McPhee's plans, obviously, but even the players would say things in the locker room earlier in the year, like, we're just trying to force George to keep us here. When they started hot, the players would admit, like, we understand that if we're not winning when the trade deadline comes, we could be out of here. And Perron and James Neal really enjoy Vegas. They love this team and they want to be here. So even the players kind of hinted at, we got to make sure we force George's hand to keep us here.
Huh. It is remarkable, and meanwhile, there's so much talk about how good their home record has been, and at the same time, I think when you do have a young team and as many young players as they do, like, I don't know if anybody's worried that James Neal was going to spend all night out on the strip here and there, but when you've got guys like the two we were talking about, Alex Tuck and Shea Theodore, and other young players that are living in hotels that are attached to casinos, I would have to think that there's at least some level of concern that Vegas, which has chewed up and spit out many, many people and very well documented over the years, that this might be an issue. How have they avoided that? What can you tell me about what the team has done to make Vegas home and not a party destination for the guys playing for the club?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, it's just a little different when you live here. It's fun to go down to the strip every once in a while, and the players will go down and see a show. They'll go down. I mean, obviously there are a ton of good restaurants down there. They'll go down, but it's just not something you do when you live here. And the players live in Summerlin, which is, well, 99% of the players live in Summerlin, which is a little kind of suburb of Vegas, and it's right next to their practice facility. They all live within they could ride their bike to the practice facility if they want. And it's kind of a upper class area up there. And I think they just kind of stay up in that area. And there are a lot of good things to do up there. They all say that they love the area. It's right next to the practice facility, so they save a lot of time and commute up there. And like I said, I think the main thing, the most important thing is that when you live here, kind of you get away from that after maybe a few weeks.
Summerlin named in 2014 one of the best places to live in America by Money magazine. Also named after Jean Amelia Summerlin, the mother of Howard R. Hughes Sr. How do you like that? Now I know all about Summerlin, Nevada. Okay. We're talking with Jesse Granger of the Las Vegas Sun, the Vegas Golden Knights. And speaking of that deadline strategy, first, a second, and a third for Thomas Tatar seemed kind of like a high price, especially considering what some of the other prices paid on deadline day for other players. So what do you think about what they gave up for Thomas Tatar?
I mean, there's no doubt that McPhee overpaid for him. I mean, you look at what San Jose gave for a guy like Evander Kane, and it's significantly less than they paid for Tatar. But I think when I talked to George, I asked him how hard was it to give up those picks, and he said it wasn't very hard because they acquired so many picks in that expansion draft. He was like, half the teams in the NHL basically made deals with George during that expansion draft, and he was able to acquire so many picks. And he told me that when he acquired all those picks, there was no there was no plan to pick all of those draft picks. Some of them he wants to pick, but some of them he knew when he acquired them that he wanted to package them and get a player. And in his mind, Tomas Tatar is the right guy. I think he fits really well with this team. First thing he said when he came here was, "This team plays fast, and that's how hockey's supposed to be played." I think he fits the culture. I think he fits the playing style. And once James Neal comes back to that second line with David Perron and Eric Halla, when Tomas Tatar can move down to that third line with Tuck and Cody Eakin, I think that it could make them even better, even deeper than they already are. And that could be one of the most dangerous third lines kind of in the playoffs. Obviously Pittsburgh's got a really good one, but with Tuck and Tatar on that third line, it's pretty stacked.
No kidding. Yeah, it's been fun to watch. Last question for you before I let you go, Jesse, and maybe you can make sense of this, because I certainly couldn't. Why did George McPhee retain salary in the Derek Brassard trade? Was he just doing a solid for the Penguins? I mean, what do you think? Why do you think he did that?
I think it's partially that. I mean, obviously we all know these GMs. I mean, they've all got relationships. It's kind of a little clique that they've got. I also think he just figured we can get a 4th round pick for nothing. Now, not for nothing, Bill Foley, Golden Knights owner, has to pay $2 million out of his pocket, but that's the luxury that McPhee has working for a guy like Foley, who has told me, I don't care if I lose $30 million, I just want to win a Stanley Cup. There are a lot of teams that, if you look around the NHL, most of the teams that have the salary cap room to make a move like that benefits your team very little, but you have to pay a lot. Most of those teams, the owners don't want to pay the $2 million, and I don't blame them. But Bill Foley has made it clear that whatever is best for the team, he will pay whatever it costs. So I think it was McPhee saw a way to essentially get a free 4th round pick and Ryan Reeves, who's been not good here, but I mean, I think he's going to be a healthy scratch once the guys come back. But McPhee basically just got a 4th round pick for nothing.
Right. Yeah, and the Ryan Reeves thing is interesting too, right? I saw that quote from him the other day where he said something like I'd do it all over again, or something like that, when he took some terrible penalties that kind of cost the team the game. And I'm like, why would you say that? Like, it's so hockey, such a strange thing. But anyway, listen, I hope you get to keep enjoying this. And I mean, what a great first season. So Jesse, thanks for making time for us. And I hope we can talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Jesse Granger of the Las Vegas Sun talking about the Vegas Golden Knights in action today. They actually will be getting going in about 90 minutes from now, taking on the New Jersey Devils at the Rock in Newark, where I know there's going to be a couple of Hockey Primetime fans, right? A couple of listeners. I know we got some Devils fans like to listen to the show. Met some of them. Good people out there. Yeah, the Devils and the Vegas Golden Knights. Should be a pretty decent game. I don't know if I would have said that at the beginning of the season, right before the season started. Ooh, the Devils and the Golden Knights. It sounds like a tantalizing matchup. It sounded terrible back in the month of, I guess it would have been like, September or something like that. But today, you're talking about a couple of teams that are contending for their division. The Devils have been fantastic. Taylor Hall is in the Hart Trophy conversation, and the Vegas Golden Knights have been one of the best teams in hockey this year. A remarkable story. How about Jonathan Marchessault? So 65 points on the season. I knew he was good. I didn't know he was that good. Coming up next, we are going to bring in our last guest of the day, of the week. His name is Pete Blackburn. With CBS Sports, and we're going to talk about more than just the Oscars, but I'm not going to lie to you, we're going to talk about the Oscars too. So that's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM, NHL Network Radio, also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Marchand circles around in front, shoots, they score! Brad Marchand circled behind the net, got a little bit of room, created some space and powered a wrist shot by Anthony Emmy in overtime. The Bruins victorious 2-1 over the Montreal Canadiens.
Hey, that was more like it last night, wasn't it? Jeez, the Bruins-Canadiens rivalry, it's sort of tilted so far in one direction. I think the Canadiens had won, 15 or something in a row against the Bruins at one point, and then the Bruins just stomped them in the 3 games they had played this year. But yesterday, they made a game of it, and it was actually a pretty fun game to watch. One that was 1-0 for the most part until the Bruins tied it late, and then, as you just heard, Brad Marchand wins it in overtime and sends the fans home happy. The Canadiens, well, I mean, how happy could you be if you're a Canadiens fan? And not only did they lose, they managed to pick up a point as well. So really just sort of the insult to injury type thing. I think they've done that in 6 straight games. They picked up at least a point, and they managed to lose 4 of them. Anyway, it's not as if we have the old draft lottery rules, not the end of the world, but certainly feels that way for a lot of Canadiens fans this year. Not for Bruins fans, though. Wow, it's all butter in Boston. I mean, who thought this team was going to be this good? What do they have, 15 regulation losses this season? One of the best teams in hockey, and one that has Stanley Cup aspirations this year, the Boston Bruins. With more on the Bruins, it is a pleasure to welcome back to the show with CBS Sports and also the co-host of a podcast called Brunch, Pete Blackburn. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for making time for us here today. Congratulations on hitting the 60,000 follower mark on Twitter. Very exciting.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome. And Paddington 2, huh? I mean, listen, we're going to talk about the Academy Awards. I definitely want to, and we will talk about the Bruins and hockey and all the rest of it. How is Paddington 2 not one of the 10 movies nominated for Best Picture?
Well, I missed the cutoff date, but I certainly expect it to be up further in the running for Best Picture next year. If it's not, boycott, we riot, we just end movies altogether because Paddington 2 is the peak of cinema.
I loved it, and I think that maybe the last time I spoke to you, I said something like, "Do I have to watch Paddington 1 before I watch Paddington 2?" And you were like, "No." I went to see Paddington 2. It was amazing, and then I at home ordered on demand Paddington 1. It was also extremely good, although I'd say maybe not as good.
That's exactly the way that I did it as well.
And you know what? It's not, I mean, listen, we are not, nobody here is being sarcastic. I always have to add that caveat because people often sort of read me the wrong way. I am being completely serious when I tell you that Paddington and Paddington 2 are both excellent films that are well worth your time. Great films for the whole family, right, Pete? I mean, it's like a great movie that mom and dad can enjoy on a completely different level and for completely different reasons than a kid can, which is really sort of my favorite type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the hardest thing to make is something that can be enjoyed by pretty much everybody. And this one is good enough. It's smart enough. It's funny enough. If you don't enjoy that movie, there's probably something wrong with you.
Yeah, you probably have no soul. All right, so that's it. I mean, that's enough on Paddington 2. We will get into the Oscars for sure. But since I did start with that Bruins clip, it's been amazing to watch. And then at the deadline, they go out and they get one of the biggest prizes in Rick Nash. I thought they gave up a lot for him, although, to be fair, I don't watch the Bruins as closely as you do. But Ryan Spooner seemed like he was a pretty good player. I know he was always mentioned in trade rumors, but he produced, especially for the role that he was in for the team. He's a center iceman, and they gave up Ryan Spooner plus to bring in Rick Nash. Are you okay with the price they paid?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I mean, they did give up a lot, but again, you said that he was one of the better prizes at the deadline, and he was. And you got to pay a fair price if you're going to go out and get one of those guys. And I think that they did. I mean, Spooner's good, and he's had a good year this year. But you also have to consider the fact that they needed scoring, and he's just not a pure scorer. And he likely wasn't going to be retained beyond this season anyway. He's a restricted free agent. It's hard to see him back here. So I don't consider that much of a loss. Ryan Lindgren is a pretty good prospect. He's probably going to be a good defenseman in a couple of years at the NHL level. But I mean, they're not lacking for those kind of prospects. So I'm okay with giving him up as well. And then a first round pick. It's going to be a late first rounder. every piece of that deal was fine to me. It didn't really sting too much giving up those guys, because I think that Nash is going to have a really significant value to them down the stretch.
Was there an update on Charlie McAvoy after he left the game early yesterday?
I believe that he's going to be evaluated tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously, I mean, that's a hold your breath type situation. The guy's got 32 points at 22 and a half minutes a night. I mean, he's 19 years old. It's pretty amazing what he's doing. And if not for Matthew Barzal, he's probably your Calder Trophy winner this year, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of people. I don't know if you were one of them, but I talked to a lot of people kind of towards the midway mark about the Calder race. And, you know, for a while, I was saying that I would put McAvoy at the top of my ballot just because of the impact that he's had on the Bruins and, you know, the strength of competition that he's faced and the minutes that he's been logging. You know, it's very, very difficult to ask that of a rookie defenseman. And, you know, he's been insanely impressive. But I do agree with you. I think it's hard. It's sort of hard to put him up there now, considering what Barzal's doing. So, you know, I don't think he's going to win it, but his impact has been, you know, huge for the Bruins.
And McAvoy's impressive numbers from an offensive standpoint, especially, or even more impressive when you consider that he missed 2 weeks earlier this year after what sounded like this sort of terrifying thing with the abnormal heart rhythm. But the Bruins seem to be saying, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that bad. Fairly common. And anyway, he is impressive. So I hope he's going to be all right. The Bruins, and that's the other thing with the Bruins. Like, I think the cardinal sin here for the Canadians, at least in my estimation, is somebody who has to watch their games. It's not losing. I mean, everybody loses games. They just happen to lose more than most, but it was how boring their games were. It was awful to watch, just painful to watch hockey, which is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun to watch hockey. It's not fun to watch the Canadians, or at least it wasn't until the last couple of weeks. But the Bruins have been full value. I mean, in terms of entertainment value, it's a very fun team to watch, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been an aspect of the Bruins that has kind of been lacking in recent years. It's just, you know, they don't seem to be having much fun out on the ice. This year, this team has a lot of fun, and you can tell that they gel really well. They have a lot of chemistry in the room. It just shines through when they play. But yeah, I mean, they're a really fun team to watch. It's one of my favorite things about this team is that there is never any quit in them. Like in years past, we've seen a lot of Bruins teams lay down when they get a couple bad breaks. This year, if they're down by 2 or 3 heading into the third period, you can't write anything off because this team really has no quit in them. It's great.
And that was it. Yesterday. The Canadians look pretty good, and winning that game 1-0. Antti Niemi is like a revelation for Montreal. He played so well in that game yesterday. But I guess there always was this sort of feeling, and I'm sure, you know, when you're watching a team, when you're following a team and watching each and every game, you get that feel, and you sort of always know. But yeah, 1-goal deficit in the third period, no problem, and they managed to pull it off with that OT win. When it comes to the Brad Marchand and the award races, like, I guess he's not going to win or even be nominated for the Hart Trophy, but I love Brad Marchand. I mean, I think he's amazing, and maybe the reason I like him so much is I don't have to play hockey against him. But like, how good is Brad Marchand, and how good of a season has he had this year?
He's been unbelievable. I mean, Patrice Bergeron's been getting a ton of the Hart talk prior to his injury, obviously, but you know, a lot of media seem to be putting him up there at the top of their ballots, but there wasn't a lot of talk about Marchand being alongside him, and I think that he's almost just as deserving as Bergeron is. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of underestimate Marchand's defensive ability. You know, Bergeron gets that credit all the time, obviously, and it's deservedly so. I mean, he's a Selke winner, you know, over and over again. But I mean, Marchand is very, very good defensively as well. So, you know, obviously, I think that's probably up there in one of the best lines in hockey. So, you know, I think that he hasn't been getting enough Hart talk. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, you're welcome. He's, every time I watch him, every time I watch the Bruins, he does something that impresses me, or even sometimes amazes me. The thing, his little move where he puts the puck in defenseman's skates, you know what I mean? Where he sort of does that and gets them to look down and then beats them. And he does it all the time, and it's just, and the other thing, I mean, the way that he goes to the net, and there was one instance yesterday where it was like, what are they doing? What are the Canadians doing? And it was just Brad Marchand just went straight into the net to beeline style, but he does that about as well as anybody else does. All right, now you and I don't always see eye to eye on the important things, namely pop culture questions. I watched earlier today Weekend Update, and I saw Hillary, and I love seeing Hillary Knight, who had the biggest smile I've ever seen on somebody's face. She had a gold medal. That was great. I love seeing her like hugging like the members of Migos after at the end of the show. But like Leslie Jones, like, am I supposed to be laughing? Because maybe do I just not get it? Like what's the deal with Leslie Jones?
To a certain extent, I think she's kind of a one-trick pony, where she just like screams and is kind of irreverent. And I think that it's funny in certain scenarios. I love her during the Olympics. Honestly, her commentary during the Olympics is pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't blame you if you don't really get it, or you don't love it. I mean, that doesn't bother me.
Okay. But yeah, Hillary Knight was amazing, and she is an absolute treasure, and it was very cool to see her on Saturday Night Live. I love that they got her out here. All right, so now the most important questions of all. I've seen 5 of the top 10, or top 10, 5 of the 10. Is it 10 or is it 9 nominees for Best Picture?
9.
So I saw Dunkirk, Lady Bird, Get Out, The Post. Oh, maybe I've only seen 4. I have not seen Shape of Water, although I'm told that a woman has sex with a fish in that film. And I've heard good. Yeah, I've heard. So have you seen all of them?
Yeah, I've seen all of them.
And you say, so, okay, first thing, what would you give Best Picture to?
I think that Get Out should win.
Okay, and if it was up to me, I agree. What do you think will win?
I think The Shape of Water is going to win. That would be my pick, but
2 minutes
seems kind of more open and up to interpretation than usual, because I feel like this was kind of a down year. There was no real runaway, other than I think Get Out was the best movie by a long shot, but it's not the type of movie that usually wins Best Picture.
And what's your take on 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is, I believe, favored if you look